Read it. A single-handed race around the world.
It sounds miserable.
It sounds profound. Heroic. Never attempted before. No stopping this time. This is the highest rung. Cannot be bested.
Anyone who enters such a thing ought to have their head examined.
You examine it till your heart's content. I've already sent in my entry form.
What?
What?
Are you serious? Claire, did you know this?
I did not examine it or give it a proper thrashing. Donald, what do you
I
mean?
shall claim the prize for you, my love. 5,000 quid.
Alone in a boat for 9 months. You're either drunk or mad.
Well, then we should have another drink immediately so that we can rule out madness. As Chichester said, any damn fool can circumnavigate the world sober. Takes a really good sailor to do it drunk. Same again?
And that's a clip from The Mercy. It stars Colin Firth and Rachel Weisz. Rachel, hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Colin, you're looking very relaxed there on your sofa.
Too relaxed?
No, but too relaxed.
Good
No, that's
afternoon.
fine.
I'll sit up.
Rachel, last time you were on was for My Cousin Rachel, and I decided she definitely did.
Really? Oh.
What do you think?
I mean, I think as I mentioned to you before, I know how I played her,
Yes.
but it doesn't help me to give that up. So, I learn a lot about you from how you see it.
Yeah. Sorry, Colin, you're a little bit out of this, but there is an ambiguity in My Cousin Rachel. And there was a sort of a disagreement at the end of the interview, and I thought, after all these years, it was okay to revisit that.
Oh, you mean you thought I'd give it up now?
Yeah.
No, I'm taking it to the grave. Sorry.
Okay, all right. That's not what you're here to talk about at all. Colin, throughout this interview, I should say we're going to be sort of walking around this subject. We're going to be talking about the film, talking about the story, but I'm not quite sure how much we can say because I'm not sure how familiar people are with this story. So I'm going to take my lead from you guys. Colin, go first. Tell us about The Mercy.
Thank you for that. I mean, it is in the public domain, and, I think being overly scrupulous about it is a tricky one. Almost shuts you up, to be honest, if you can't.
Like I said, I'll take my lead from you guys.
Yeah, so. I don't know. We're obviously not giving you the absolute ending, but I think that we can safely say that we're not going to try and sell this as a feel-good film.
It's a bit like Romeo and Juliet. Everyone knows what happens in the end, but you still want to see it.
And you want to intervene, don't you? You want to say, no, wake up, it's not dead. And hope people make their decisions differently. And because you can see people walking into a trap. We don't see it in our own lives. Mm-hmm. We're always looking at the mistakes we made in the rear view, and it's terribly clear. And usually it starts off with small misjudgments, which get you entangled. And in a case like this, what he undertook was so immense that, understandable mistakes became amplified to tragic proportions.
So we should say it's Donald Crowhurst is who we're talking about, who Colin plays, and Claire Crowhurst, played by Rachel. So explain how it is that we're on board this boat with you and this race that has been the spur for this film.
Well, at the time, it's 1968,
Yes.
Sunday Times creates a competition with a prize of, was it five?
Well, yes.
2 prizes.
Quite complicated.
It's very complicated, but it's
There was
sail
a-
around the world single-handed, alone on a boat, and anyone could enter. So it kind of sparked everyone was imagining themselves doing it, and there were some very experienced sailors, Sir Robert Knox Johnson, and then Donald Crowhurst, who was a sailor. He hadn't sailed very far, but he was a brilliant navigator, a dreamer. He was an ordinary man who did an extraordinary thing. He entered this race, and he got himself into some deep water. You finish it off, Colin.
Yeah, Deep Water was once going to be a title for the film. I mean, it's. I think Rachel is right. I mean, the traps he got into were before he even set sail. This is the thing. It seemed like a magnificent idea. There's nothing wrong with having a magnificent idea. The minute you start to implement it, you're passing these points of no return you probably don't recognise while you're on dry land. You've got to get a boat. So, a boat, you've got to get money for the boat. How do you get money? You've got to get a sponsor. You're going to get a sponsor. It's going to involve some advertising and press. So then you've got a press agent. And then it starts to spiral out of control from there because you're being broadcast. And then there's a mythology attached to you, the outsider who's going to do this thing, and then all the doubters kicking in. And so you're competing with that narrative. You're thinking of you're mad. And by that time, other people are invested in it. And so his options for changing his mind was running out. He also staked his house and his business. The money started to run out. There was a deadline. In order to meet it, he made some decisions under pressure. By the time he left, on the very day of the deadline, his contract meant that if he changed his mind, he would forfeit everything. And he was in financial difficulties. So these are the prosaic facts, that his house and his business, and these were problems he was trying to solve. To actually lose those because of changing his mind was also already a diabolical trap. Not to mention what was going on just as a person in his spirit. So he left in a state where he was not prepared at all. The boat was not in good enough shape. There was not the right equipment on board. So you hope you can fix it as he goes along. Meanwhile, back home, the press agent is putting pressure on him to report something good. He's
Played by David Thewlis, having a good time.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, yeah. That's as I said, it's not a feel-good movie. You feel good watching David Thewlis. So Crowhurst exaggerated his speeds, and I think that may have been as much as anything else to just get the pressure off. Say, give them some good news back home, because he was going very slowly.
So Rachel, Claire seems aware of the fact that this is a crazy idea. In fact, doesn't think he's serious about it. Almost till it's too late. When it came to the moment, did she think, I should stop this? Do you think?
It's very hard for me to speak for her, but in the way I imagine it, I'm sure many cells in her being were screaming, please don't go, please don't go.
Because the audience is saying, clearly this is lunacy.
Of course, yes. But I think it was very complicated. Perhaps she felt that he was asking for encouragement, and she loved him so much that she wanted to do the right thing by him. In our story, she says, if I don't let you do the thing that you want to do, then perhaps you'll never forgive me. And then what will our marriage be? And that, to me, is a very moving idea, that you have to let someone follow their dreams. But at that point, the dream had become so financially complicated in the way that Colin just explained, that it wasn't just to live your dream or not live your dream. It was really, do you lose everything if you don't go? I mean, financially, your home, your security. So it's the most complicated moment that night before he goes, I think, for any couple to have gone through. It's sort of unimaginably complicated.
And Claire is still alive. What's her relationship with the film? Did you get a chance to talk to her? What research did you do to... I mean, you're clearly not doing an impression of her. Presumably you feel a greater sense of responsibility when you're playing someone who is still with us. Of course,
a huge responsibility. She is completely understandably an immensely private person, and she gave a lot of interviews at the time to the BBC, and so I had a lot of footage to look at of her putting on a kind of public presentation to account for herself and her family and her husband. So I got a sense of her through that. The rest was just imagining.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Colin, how much of this, from your point of view, is at sea? How much do you film at sea on a boat?
A lot. I can't remember the maths now of where. I can't even remember where we shot what a lot of the time. Teignmouth is very memorable because we went there. If I remember, I think it was about a month of shooting on land, which is what stuff that Rachel and I did together. And the rest was at sea. I think it was about 6 weeks of shooting at sea. I mean, we weren't outside of land at sea all the time, really just because our boat, it was life imitating art. We couldn't get the boat ready in time.
It does look a rubbish boat.
Well, it's actually a pretty good replica of the real boat. And I don't think it is a rubbish boat.
The wood just looked as though it wasn't going to go around the world, though.
Well, that was a problem because his float did spring a leak. I can't remember all the technicalities of it, but... it was, I think, in reality, the boat could have done it. I think it was an extraordinarily fast boat. I think it was about the fastest boat in its class.
And he designed it.
Well, he redesigned it. It was called the Piver design. Multi-hulls, I think, were relatively new. Certainly, trimarans were. And he adapted the design, to make the cabin smaller for purposes of speed, certainly not for comfort. I think it was the fastest boat, potentially, but it's very complicated. It's about where you are with the wind. It's not good going into the wind, and he was going into the wind a lot in the early stages of the race.
And those scenes that you're filming on the boat, you have a lot of work to do with not very much, in as much as we see your sort of disintegration.
It was a strange exercise. It was a great relief to have Rachel appear at one point, just because I had another person. Because you're having to just sort of...
As a hallucination, I should
Yes,
add,
a sort of apparition.
for
And
those who haven't seen it.
yeah. It's a very different exercise, isn't it? Because what makes acting easier is having another actor. You know, there's an old sort of, adage about acting is reacting. It's true. You get an awful lot for nothing if you've got somebody else to bounce off. And you can stop acting and, just use your instincts. If you've got nobody else there, the challenge is completely different. So you've got to react to something. So I had to have a very clear idea, because we weren't shooting chronologically. I had to have a very clear idea in my head as to where he was in terms of his mental state at any given moment. And if, for instance, he hallucinates, or even if he's remembering something, I really had to try to make that as real as possible.
And I have to add, as a spectator of the film, because I wasn't on the boat apart from that one flash of hallucination, watching where Colin went mentally and emotionally as Donald on that boat. I think the film is worth watching for that. I really think it's incredible. And it's embarrassing to say this on the radio, but it's incredible work.
Forget he's here.
Yeah, no, he goes somewhere. He really goes somewhere incredibly deep and dark, and a man is really losing his mind from loneliness and from frustration. And I think he does some really sensational, very vulnerable and extraordinary work. I've never seen him like that.
He's quite good, Colin Firth, isn't he?
Yeah, he's all right.
I'm going to see can we have all that in writing?
What is it about this story, do you think, that is worth the fact that it keeps on being revisited? It's been told in books and documentaries, opera, art installations. There's been a BBC film in 1979 called Alone. There's been French film, Russian film. Deep Water came out in 2006. I mean, there's something about this story which is, I don't know, is it mythical? Is there a morality to it? What is it, do you think?
I think it's that he's an ordinary man. He was very gifted in many ways, but he was an ordinary man who dared to do something extraordinary. And I think we can all relate to him. I'm a woman, and I have no desire to sail, but I can identify with him and his story, in that he's human and he's frail and he failed and he made mistakes. And there's something about watching the arc of that story that you can just see, I can see myself in it, in a much smaller, much less high stakes way.
I think that's the answer. It's that we see ourselves in ways we might not quite be able to define, whether it's because of recognizing traps. This kind of thing endures. It does have mythic status in the way that, I don't know, the Icarus myth has, or all of Shakespeare's tragedies and the Greek tragedies. We love a feel-good story. We love stories of inspiration and triumph, but at the same time, we do keep telling ourselves stories about our shortcomings and about reaching for greatness and it costing too much or falling short, and trying, I suppose, to understand ourselves a little better about what is an overreach, what are the small failings. I don't know, even the expression Achilles' heel. You've got the great hero with that one flaw, and is that going to unravel all the greatness? And I think we just keep trying to reinterpret all that. And of course, these are all stories of gigantic epic proportions. But us mortals sit and watch them and apply them to all the banal details of our lives, I think. It's just something we keep doing. I think that's the part of the storytelling process.
Colin Firth, Rachel Weisz, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.